Welcome back to the Recharge Zone podcast. I'm your host, Brent Doty, joined by my co-host, Ann-Margaret.
Hi, everyone.
And today we have special returning guest, Roland Ruiz, General Manager of EAA. Hi, Roland.
Hey there. Good to be with you all.
So Roland's back, and we're here to talk about 30 years of the EAA. June 28th, 1996 is when our agency came to be. And so we're going to kind of break down some facts about the EAA. But before we do that, we'd like to congratulate Roland on 20 years at the EAA.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Awesome.
20 years.
I know.
Seems like yesterday.
Right? And so some of you all may know that the EAA first officially began operating back in June 28th, 1996. And a lot of what has happened since has changed and, developed over time. But one thing still remains the same. The Edwards Aquifer is a vital resource for the livelihoods of 2.5 million South Central Texans. So let's take it back to 1996, Roland. And can you share with us a brief overview of the first decade, what it was like for the community, the agency, and what happened during that time?
Sure. Of course, that predates my tenure, but I can tell you of the history from what I know of it and from some of the people that tell the stories of the experiences that they had as EAA employees and board members and such. So at the beginning, understand that when the Edwards Aquifer Authority came into existence, it came into existence because there was a lot of conflict about the resource and what to do about it. And of course, it came out of litigation, and there were different ideas floated around for many years and different thoughts about how to manage this resource. And finally, the state legislature came up with their plan that ended up being Senate Bill 1477 in 1993. And in that bill basically gave us the regulatory framework that we now have. The permitting system, the pumping cap, the fact that you can't move Edwards water outside of our jurisdictional boundaries, all that was in play. That was like a 180-degree turn about from the way groundwater had been used in the Edwards and, frankly, how groundwater had been used statewide up to that point. And so you might imagine that the transition from non-regulation to regulation was very difficult. I can imagine there were a lot of landmines, if you will, political and otherwise, that had to be navigated. And so you have individuals who historically have had use of the Edwards as a resource without any limitation, without any control. And they're able to use as much water when they want it and how they want it for back in time, back in history. And then all of a sudden there's this entity that comes into existence that's going to have to tell them how much they can use and when they can use it. And it was a true example of a government coming into existence to tell people, put some new restrictions on them. And as you can imagine, that's never a pleasant process.
Yes,
and so
growing pains, right?
I think there was some general really trepidation from probably some old original EAA employees who had to go out there and interact with well owners, property owners, and explain to them the new law and engage with them, and having to come into the old EAA offices to prove up their use so they could get a permit.
Yeah.
And so the first 10 years was really about that. It was about the permitting process and getting that right. And actually it wasn't until 2008, a good 12 years after the creation of the EAA, that the permits were finally finalized in the under the cap and the 572,000 acre feet. So there's a lot of backstory to that, but needless to say, there was a lot of we went from chaos and uncertainty to a little bit less chaos and uncertainty, and then ultimately to where we are today, where we've got a tremendous amount of certainty and predictability. But it happened through a lot of difficult work, a lot of engagement with the public and people that really had to kind of put their necks out to make it happen.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking back to like the first general manager, Greg Ellis, who kind of set the standard when he was here as to what this agency was going to do and be, and his engagement with people. He wasn't always a popular guy out in the community because of the role he had to play.
Yeah.
And so fast forward to when I was able to step into the general manager role, I think the work that Greg did made it easier for me to come in and then engage with the public in a different way because that hard work had already been done. So it made my transition quite a bit easier.
Yes. All those relationships that were built over time and kind of forged at the beginning. Because like you said, it was a lot of boots on the ground, face-to-face interactions with customers and permit holders, right?
Yeah, and I'll also say that back then, today we have roughly 100, full-time employees. And then we have an internship program that also brings us more people to carry out the work. But back then, we were less than a third of employee count than we are today. Wow. So you had a smaller organization. You had people that were doing multiple types of work. And I hear stories of office personnel going out in the field and doing field work.
Checking on wells.
Yeah.
Monitoring wells.
Right, because you just had to. It was all in. Everybody was all in. And so I think the positive outgrowth of that was that kind of built a sort of camaraderie in the culture of the EAA. And so we talk about now core values and being collaborative and all those positive things that we do and say. I think in the beginning there was no choice but to do that because we were smaller and the work was so big and it was absolutely time sensitive and all that had to get done in an appropriate course of an appropriate way. So I always go back and look at the people that were here at the beginning with some level of awe and admiration because their work wasn't easy.
I think I totally echo those sentiments. I think especially in those first 10 years, the community, ranchers, farmers, municipalities, spring communities, they all knew that the resource needed to be conserved and protected, and they all knew something like the EAA had to exist. But I think they sort of saw it as a necessary obligation rather than more of a benefit. And I think over time, that sentiment has shifted more to a respect for the EAA and that they're glad that it exists.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, and for a number of reasons, I think first and foremost, I think the people that did the work and really went above and beyond to do it right and get it right help build a certain level of credibility. But then the programs themselves have proven to work. We've endured drought after drought. We've sustained, aquifer levels and spring flows in a way that probably could not have been imagined with the rising demand that we've had in the region and coupled with drought. So we all know that the frame of reference is always the historic drought of record of the 1950s, and that's what we use kind of as the benchmark in all planning. In fact, the state of Texas does. But to think that we've endured conditions very similar, if not more intense, than that drought of the 50s, maybe not as long, and that aquifer conditions, spring flows, protected habitats have fared very well.
Yes.
And so that tells me that way back in 1993 when the legislature convened and said, hey, here's our plan, that the foresight that was shown by the law that they enacted that became the EAA Act, I mean, that just doesn't happen every day. And so I give credit also to the legislative body that had the wherewithal to think outside the box and create this thing that now exists and that frankly now has become kind of a model of management, groundwater management, that the rest of the state of Texas looks at, and they kind of look at it and think, hey, can we replicate that someplace else so that we can wrap our arms around this issue of groundwater depletion around the state?
Yeah. And speaking of growth over time, Roland, I know we often get questions about different types of development occurring within our jurisdiction. Can you shed some light on where the agency's authority begins and where it ends?
Yeah, that's a good question, because we oftentimes there's a misperception of what the EAA does and what we can do from a regulatory perspective. And really, when you look at the statute that we lean on, the EAA Act, our regulatory powers are quite limited. They're extensive when it comes to the Edwards Aquifer itself. The Edwards Aquifer is the only groundwater resource, the only aquifer that we regulate, that we can regulate, because that's how the law was set up. And so we don't have any powers to regulate surface water or any other aquifer that either overlies or underlies the Edwards. And so we have a very prescriptive mission that was given to us. And with that, also we don't have the ability to regulate land development or land use. Now, we can work with property owners in a non-regulatory way to collaborate with them to do some very good and positive things, especially up in the recharge zone, to benefit the aquifer. But you see a lot of stories and a lot of community involvement and engagement and pushback, in fact, on developments when they do come into the region, especially on the recharge zone or the contributing zone. And folks get worked up because they don't want the development close to them. And so oftentimes they look to impacts to the water resource, i.e. the Edwards Aquifer, and they try to leverage that to get what they want out of those processes. And usually those are processes through the state, through the TCEQ, which is the permitting agency for example, wastewater treatments, for anything having to do on the Edwards recharge zone through their Edwards Aquifer Protection program, which is a regulatory program that really regulates stormwater and things like that up in the watershed to the Edwards. So it's not necessarily our role, but we're certainly willing and able, and whenever we can, serve as a resource to those issues. So again, our role is to regulate the Edwards Aquifer itself, and our regulatory powers beyond that just don't exist. We, however, have an opportunity to work as partners with folks to try to achieve the better outcomes that are possible, mainly through sharing the scientific data that we've amassed over the years, our experience with managing the groundwater resource itself, and the work with spring flows in the Springs communities. All that data we've collected and we've analyzed, and what we've seen through our water quality monitoring program, that's all information that we make publicly accessible. I don't know if people really know that or appreciate that, but that's a tremendous role, I think, that we play by sharing that information publicly. And I always tell folks who are concerned about issues like wastewater treatment plants or, data centers are the emerging thing. We're here to help you understand the issues. And if you want to work towards better outcomes in all those issues, then work with the landowners, work with the developers ahead of time, rather than wait till, as the old saying is, till the cow's out of the barn. Get in there early and work with them and see what you can achieve.
Yes.
Improved ways to monitor things and set standards and that sort of thing. Trying to set up win-win situations between development and the residents and the regulatory agencies. Frankly, it's not as simple as just one or the other. It's we're in it together, whether we realize it or not, because we all live here, we all work here, and so I think we all want the same outcome. We want a sustainable, good place to live and work, and it's just how do we get there and how do we ensure that that happens. So we just need to work together.
Yes.
Now, speaking of that community collaboration and partnership, maybe perhaps one of the better examples of that is the City of San Antonio's Edwards Aquifer Protection Program, which kind of started in 2000 based on citizen involvement, a city getting concerned about urban expansion and investing long-term in conservation. Roland, can you talk about EAA's involvement with the EAPP, Edwards Aquifer Protection Program, over time and how we partnered and collaborated with the city?
Yeah, that is a good example because our role in that actually historically has been that of a technical resource. We had and continue to have an outstanding staff of geoscientists, and folks that are really experienced out in the field, geologists that can go and assess properties and develop reports that give an understanding of the value of properties for the benefit of recharge, which is what the EAPP program is all about, is trying to secure as many properties or conservation easements up in the recharge zone and contributing zone for the benefit of the aquifer in terms of water quality and water quantity. So it just made sense that the EAA would be a partner in that because we had the technical know-how and we had the boots on the ground. And over time, that relationship solidified to the point where we now have a working interlocal agreement with the City of San Antonio that's been in place now for some time. And we try to contribute to that effort the best that we can in terms of staff hours, but also just as sharing of knowledge. And I know we have representation on their Conservation Advisory Board, which is the board appointed by the city to make recommendations to the city council on property acquisitions. So it's an example of the role we can play outside the regulatory role because if we leverage the very best of what we have, which is our knowledge and our technical know-how, I think we can affect positive outcomes that, you can't always foresee what the actual effect will be, but you go down that path and eventually you come across some things that, oh, wow, look, as a result of our involvement in that, we ultimately ended up with the field research part, that we're doing unprecedented type of in a controlled environment because we have access to this piece of property in perpetuity. We can start to measure things. We can start to collect data and see how the land changes over time in response to some of the program activities we're doing there, and measure the concepts that we think would benefit the aquifer through mitigating runoff and the loss of water and sedimentation, all those sorts of things. We now have a place where we can actually watch it with our own eyes and measure it with our own tools to start to refine that. And hopefully, eventually, we'll be able to replicate that across the entirety of the region for the benefit of everyone.
Yeah.
I think that's a perfect example of how EAA can be a resource and a partner to the community. I think some listeners may be also wondering about the regulatory side. How do we actually restrict the amount of water that can be pumped out of the ground? How do we stop people from over pumping? Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. Of course, everything that we do in terms of our mission is manage, enhance, and protect. Everything we do under the manage, which is managing use of the aquifer, is done through a very prescriptive permitting program, permitting system that was premised on a combination of historic use and what you call correlative use. But anyway, we got to a cap, a pumping cap of 572,000 acre feet. And so now we manage under that cap. And what I mean by managing is that the permitting system has allocated all the permits for pumping that will ever be allocated under that cap. Mm-hmm. And that's what I tell people who are concerned about, well, is this data center going to come in and basically pump the Edwards dry? The answer is no, because we have a system in place that addresses that. and it addresses it by having the cap. Also, within that cap, there's boundaries that dictate where you can and cannot use Edwards water, and that means you cannot export water outside of our region beyond our boundaries. And so what ended up happening over time is that system created a true water market, an Edwards water market. The EAA didn't create the market. The market just kind of emerged out of the regulatory program as people started to realize the urbanized areas need more water, and the rural areas have excess water. And so you started to see the transactions occur between rural agriculture and urbanized areas. And so we saw a transference of irrigation water that was moved over to municipal and industrial use historically, and it's still happening today. So that permitting system is the backbone of that. Without that permitting system, you don't have that market. And that's why when people talk about water markets outside of the Edwards region across the state, they struggle because they don't have those hard parameters that make it a market. So now the market really helps facilitate conservation, stewardship, because what the market did, it monetized the value of Edwards water. And so, it's the common sense of when something has a real financial value to it, our motivation then is to save it, to preserve it, to use it more efficiently. And that's exactly what's happened across the region, the Edwards region, as a result of the permitting program. So now we kind of function as a clearinghouse for the water market. Anytime somebody sells or leases part of their permit or all of their permit to some other entity, they have to come through us to effectuate that change. And so our role is to make sure we keep track of every acre foot of water that's permitted, because then we're going to hold them accountable for complying with staying within the permit and for also complying with our critical period management restrictions when they're in place. So I think what's remarkable in all of that is that in spite of the fact that we've seen tremendous growth in the population and we've seen droughts, that the number of entities that, quote, overpump is really, really nominal when you think about the number of pumpers that we have and the water that is allocated. And I also point out to folks that we have never come anywhere close to achieving or reaching the pumping cap. Even in the worst of years where we're in severe drought and there's such high demand we don't come close. In fact, it's a testament, I think, to how well the system has worked, but also to how the region has come along to understand what it means to be conservation oriented in their water use. And so, to Brent's point earlier, I think that's where the value of what the EA does has grown in the eyes of folks across the region, because they see it with their own eyes that, this is actually helping us. It's giving a benefit to us, a real economic benefit, because people are still wanting to move in here and develop business. And I don't think that they would necessarily want to do that if there was this idea that there was a water shortage or not enough water. So I think the Edwards has a significant role in that.
And to keep track of those numbers, these production wells are physically metered. They have a meter, just like your house has a meter to track water, for all of these production wells across the region, which is kind of unheard of anywhere else in Texas. It's the only place where we can pretty much monitor the water use by the gallon across the system.
Yeah, no, you're right. And that's where, if you're going to have a regulatory program, a system, you have to begin with knowing how much everybody's using. Otherwise, don't bother.
True.
Don't bother.
And Roland, does that kind of ensure that there is, with the EAA and our regulatory management, does that ensure groundwater security for the counties within our jurisdiction?
I think it gives security to the Edwards, I can't speak to other groundwater sources, but certainly the Edwards has that water security. And the Edwards at one time, back in history, was the sole source of water for the vast majority of our region. It's not the case anymore, and I think that's a good thing, because over time, the realization has come to everyone that we cannot just rely on the Edwards alone. And that's just common, if you want to call it common business sense. It just makes sense because just like if you have a financial portfolio, the more diversified you are, the better, the more secure you're going to be. And it's the
That's
same.
a good analogy.
It's the same for water. And, I'll credit San Antonio Water System for that, because they saw that a long time ago. And they started diversifying their water portfolio in a way that puts them in a very favorable position now as they look to the future. And then other cities to the east, for example, the Springs communities, New Braunfels, Utilities, and San Marcos, they've done the same. To the point where I think in my most recent conversations with folks out to the east in both those communities, I think of their water use, the Edwards is now at about 18% of their overall use. So they've significantly managed their Edwards use, which is good because that's where the springs are. And what we've learned is that localized pumping has a significant effect on groundwater levels locally and on spring flows.
In Roland, so looking back on on your 20 years at the EAA, I think over time you can probably confirm that the notion that the Edwards Aquifer needed to be protected and managed has stood the test of time. How has that fact been reinforced over time, and how do you think it's increased in awareness of future water planning for the region, like you were mentioning?
Yeah, I think that the idea of what we do, to your point, standing the test of time, I think it's actually been proven through some of the more difficult times, the times of drought. And so one of the things I tell people is trying to put our work into perspective is that we manage from drought to drought. We manage through drought. We don't solve drought. We don't eliminate drought, but we manage the resource through drought until the next rainy time.
Yes.
And that's just the way it's going to be. I think it's going to be even more so in the future. If you look at climate modeling predictions and such, which all say that we're likely to have continuation of droughts, of more intense droughts followed by more intense rain. And so I think we're seeing that right now to some degree. So, but I think the proof or the evidence that it's worked and stood the test of time is when you look back, you look at the data, and you look at the data of drought periods under this system, and just look back to 2011, 2014, that drought, and then this current drought, and where we are in terms of conditions. And we have fared really, really well. The aquifer has fared well. Although when you look at it with your plain eye and you go out to the spring systems, for example, and things look dry and things look bad. But the reality is that spring flows continue. And because they continue, we can have a greater confidence that we can continue to use the Edwards across the entirety of the region and rely on it. We have a greater predictability in it. And I think that's good for the communities. That's good for the various industries, including the agricultural industry, because they know what they know. They know what we've got in the Edwards, and there's a certain level of assurance there. In spite of the drought, they know what they're going to have to work with.
It's like it's something that they can rely on because they know it's being protected, it's managed effectively and efficiently.
Right.
So, Roland, what's the best place that people can go to learn about the future of water?
That's a good question.
I was going to tell you,
might be biased.
would it be the Texas Water Development Board? Because I know they have their new.
Yeah, the Texas Water Development Board is basically the keeper of the state's water plan. In that state water plan is compiled from different planning regions across the state. And I liken it to kind of an accounting process. It's like an accounting sheet that gives you the balance sheet of where the water is and who's using it and how it's being allocated region by region. And also within those plans, various entities put their projects, their future projects. They want their projects in the plan because it then enables them to submit to the Water Development Board for assistance with funding for those projects. Yes. So it's kind of a pre-qualifier. But it's hard to say that's the place to go to understand the future, because it's so nuanced depending on where you are in the state of Texas.
That's true.
Right now you're seeing a lot of discussion, debate about water in East Texas, that there's someone who wants to go in there and they've purchased property and they want to export water from East Texas to points west where there's a scarcity of water. And the local there are divided. Some say you can't do that. We don't want you to do that. You can't take our water. And there's others who say, well, but it's my water, it's my property, I can do with it what I want. And so that's the debate in Texas.
The push and pull of everything.
And that doesn't happen anymore within the Edwards because of how far along we've gotten in that process. And now that in the Edwards, the groundwater rights, we know they're a property right. And we respect that within our permitting system and the way we deal with that. And we acknowledge that. And so we have that, going back to the certainty and the predictability. That's why we have that. But the future of water in general in Texas, I think, is, it's cloudy. No pun intended, because
there's so much uncertainty.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned the future. Speaking of the future, what do you think is on the horizon for the EAA? Short term and then long term.
I think for the EAA, where we're looking to on the short term is we want to make sure we get our habitat conservation plan reapproved and get another incidental take permit issued to us by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and we're hoping that would result in a 30-year term. And the reason that I would like to see a 30-year term is that the longer the term, it just
the more certainty.
It feeds into the certainty. It feeds into the reliability and regulatory and legal, as well as sustainability for the resource. So that's at the forefront right now. I think longer term, we've begun the work, like I've mentioned earlier, at the Field Research Park, about ways we can better deal with the land up in the vast watershed of the Edwards, where I think there's a lot of work to be done in educating folks up there and bringing them along on some of the more basic ways that you can improve your land to retain more water, resulting in better soil conditions, so that when you do hit drought, you keep more water in the soil for longer periods of time. And then by doing so, you're also enhancing the quality of recharge that's going ultimately into the Edwards. So we're taking more of a land management approach to that. And so I think the future largely rests, as our history has, the future is going to look a lot like the past. We're going to have to work with people, and we're going to have to engage with them. The good news is, it's not going to be through a regulatory mandate. It's going to be through a willing, collaborative partnership that hopefully will end up with similar results. 30 years from now, whoever's here may be talking about how successful that effort was and how it's helped sustain the Edwards beyond.
That's amazing to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, very well said, Roland. And thank you for sharing your responses in all these different questions. And we encourage our listeners to go back to the previous Roland episodes for more content like this. I think this might be the 5th time now that you've been on, maybe once a year.
I'm glad to do it.
Yeah.
We're glad to have you, Roland.
Appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Recharge Zone podcast. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. Have questions, ideas for topics, or things you would like to share with us? Well, reach out to us by emailing us at rechargezone@edwardsaquifer.org or drop us a comment in your favorite podcast hosting platform. The Recharge Zone podcast is the official podcast for the Edwards Aquifer Authority, a groundwater district which protects the portion of the Balcones Fault Zone Edwards Aquifer, a jurisdictional area that provides water for over 2.5 million South Central Texans and covers more than 8,000 square miles across 8 counties. Tune in to charge up your knowledge on all things Edwards Aquifer from the EAA.